What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 9 of On the 50. I'm your host, Dan Shack, coming to you from Durham, North Carolina. Today's episode is a really special one, and it was especially interesting for me as someone who is sort of aspiring in this career track and as someone who was in the shows designed by this person, Scott Koter. He is currently the program coordinator at Santa Clara Vanguard since 2016. He was the program coordinator at Cavaliers between 99 and 2015, during which they won multiple times. 2000, 2001, 2, I think 4, 6. So he has quite the depth of accolades, and if you know anything about the Cavaliers designs and Vanguard's designs now, they are very forward thinking, and they certainly have a very specific identity in terms of visual integration with music and choreography and originality of concepts. It's not enough good things I could say about Scott. He's also an awesome judge. He was a DCI judge before he became a designer, and he has been judging WGI since 2013. So I always look forward to seeing him because he's just a really positive guy. I had a blast doing this podcast with him. I feel like I just got my mind blown and I learned a lot. Something that I think needs to be said is, though Scott has been doing this activity in various forms for many, many years, he said stemming back to the 70s, in fact, he is super humble. He couldn't stop talking about all the people that he works with, and that he has essentially done what he's done because of the support of the other designers that he's worked with. And there was no sense of ego. It was really incredible to see, and something that he mentioned that I think is admirable and everyone should strive for is just that he's a lifelong learner, and he has no sense of feeling like he's arrived. He keeps pushing himself. He keeps thinking of new creative ideas. He keeps learning of new ways to collaborate with the people he works with. And it's just amazing to hear from someone who has done so much, but has such an excitement towards the activity and towards his different roles in the activity. So highly recommend this one, guys. Check it out.
Administration means to serve, and that's what a program coordinator is. It's a serve. It's a facilitator. It's a guider. But, and this is leadership. This is parenting. It's not just pageantry. It's coaching. It's whatever. But a great leader, whatever you're leading, if your family, your children, your dog, whatever, a great leader takes people where they want to go. Okay? An exemplary leader takes people where they never imagined they could go. Okay? Like for me, that's where I get my biggest sense of, I don't say accomplishment, but satisfaction, I guess, is being in a room with people and working one-on-one, small group, individual, and then, you praise in public, not criticize, but guide on the side. But it's when the collective all, or even individual parts, maybe change their approach a little bit and things like that. So being in a room where you got different people, and now, this team at Vanguard, Michael Gaines and Andy Toth, and I and Bart Woodley, who does some work with us too. We've been working together really since, Michael Gaines wrote Kiski Band's Drill in 1992. So, since then I know him really well, obviously, and Andy since '98. But at the point we have some of that, but we have obviously now this would have been year 5 with the Rennicks. Okay, who every time I hear him talk, yesterday we were on a call, I learn 100 more things in it, and not even learn yes, I learn, but I also get more insight into how their process is and what they think, and then that's useful for me because it helps them. My job is to help everybody individually be the best them they can, and then together putting this together that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, if that makes sense. Okay.
Right.
One thing I've talked about this since I read a book, but Disney, the whole Imagineer and their process is 5 sensing and using all the senses. So you walk into, when you can go back to Magic Kingdom and you go down Main Street, you can smell stuff, you can buy stuff to taste, you can touch some things, you can see some things, you hear things. And no matter where you're going in those parks and on their attractions, that's what you're doing. That's important to them. Well, in pageantry, we don't have the luxury of taste and smell. Although I remember one time, my first WGI championships as a spectator, Music City did, I think it was a Middle Eastern show, but some of their staff was up sitting around where the judges were, which I was, and they had some incense smell, which I thought was actually pretty smart, actually. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But my point is we don't have to do that. So we have look, as I've talked about, and sound, and those two things together need to do that, so one can't exist without the other. So that if somebody unfortunately would go blind, you'd still be able to use some descriptive words. And if somebody went deaf, likewise. That doesn't mean it has to be literal. You know, the music goes off and you see something that looks like a racetrack and you go, oh, it must be playing. That I don't mean literally. I just mean emotionally.
Right.
That makes sense.
It does. And, you know, unfortunately, I don't think achieving that kind of synthesis is at all as easy as you make it sound. You know, I think that is absolutely the goal, you know, is that it feels matched, that the elements that you've chosen feel like they're emerging from the same resource. So that, and like, I always like, if I could like visualize like design, for example, I always visualize like a nucleus. That it's like there's some core at the middle, but it's kind of vacant until all those kind of residual and smaller micro ideas start to come together. But eventually it should like form this like diagram, this 3D diagram that is like substantial and it's all like relative.
Right.
But like,
sorry to interrupt, but that's
please.
what we call layering.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the layering with the buzzword we hear.
Right.
It's layers. But yeah, it has to be, if it's bread, it's bread. But then, you know, how are you nuancing that bread? And that's a process. You want to have enough out there on early enough that it's sort of like, okay, wait, I think we know it's bread or it's going to be bread. I can see that. But, you know, you have to have, you know, some of those things can happen in real time and by accident. Other things need to be planned. You either wait for them or they're details, and that's what we call producing. So,
right.
What you said is perfect. I call that layering.
Right.
Yeah. Or depth or breadth, something like that.
Right. And this definitely brings me to something I am personally, and I'm sure many people are interested in, is, you know, how do you see, I guess more concretely, how do you see your role at Vanguard? And that doesn't necessarily mean that what you're doing at Vanguard is exactly the same at Cavaliers, because I would love to talk about the Cavaliers too. But, you know, right now, when you know, you're at kind of your most advanced and your most mature as a designer, what do you see your job as being at Vanguard? If you could kind of pinpoint those like major bullets that you feel like you have to do, what do you consider those things to be?
Well, some of it's some housekeeping things. I mean, to be honest with you, some organizational things, you know, setting up the meetings, getting organized for the meetings, setting an agenda for the meeting. And, you know, I mean, sometimes you just say, okay, an agenda could be, okay, we're going to get on and we're going to brainstorm about something, or give a little assignment, something to think about prior. So it's like the organization part, the housekeeping part, archiving things. I recommend people script or write something down. You never know.
Yes.
You know, I recommend that you do a work and you go back and you reflect on the notes. It's kind of hard to facilitate a meeting and ask and do things plus take notes. And I try to do it. Sometimes I'll either delegate or I'll scribble or I'll just write words. But what happens is when if I'm doing that, if I'm doing both, because there are calls I don't say anything. There's other calls and I'm asking depending on where it is in the season, I'm asking specific questions, or, you know, we're getting a little bit more micro. What I mean by micro is let's talk about this part of the show, which we don't have fleshed out. What are our big ideas? You know, backward design is a curriculum model where what is it you want the students to know and be able to do, and then how are you going to get there? And then the big ideas, you know, first, okay, we're doing a show about bread. Okay, what's the big idea? A dumb analogy, but then what are the essential questions? Well, how is bread, you know, that you want people to say, how can bread, not that it probably would be, how can that be effective to the audience? But you have to have, you have to ask questions. And so that's what I'm doing along the way. Then after the meeting, I'll go back and read what my scribble is or my rough bullets. And then I'll put a little bit more there. But then what that does is it puts, for me, it's a duality, of the tactile writing and thinking. Then I got it. Like I pretty much, once I type it in there, I remember it. And then I'll put it on a mental Post-it note because let's say then 3 weeks later, we get a draft, let's say musically of something we talked about on that call, or been talking about, or a sketch of a visual thing, whatever it is, and it'll be a little different than what I perceived what we talked about, or even what we said. And I won't go, hey, you said it was going to be blue and now it's green. It's more like, hey guys, I look back in the notes a couple of weeks ago, we talked it could be green. Are we still thinking that? Or tell me how we got the blue. And the way you ask questions can get people to think, and what it has to do is it has to get them to process. And that's when it could be, yeah, I tried green, or, it could be like, well, we didn't have any green fabric. It could be 100 reasons why. It could be some creative reasons. It could be some other resources. But that's sort of what you do, and it's along the way. I think that's what I do most in the design process. Obviously set timelines. I think that's an important thing. Even if they're soft, you do have to. Great administrative, great leading is pushing, pulling, or nudging. You're always doing one of those things. And there's, I'm sure, a majority of everybody that's listening today who is a teacher or a parent, at least, or, trained a pet, but you're doing one of those three things pretty much all the time. And at some point, like all the birds nested around my deck, which I can't power scrub right now, at some point those birds, the mother birds, push the babies out. They leave, but maybe they don't see it. But in this case, you're sort of like I feel like a great program coordinator, at least in my sort of like a great grandfather. You can be a rah-rah cheerleader, but you can also push a little bit if you need to.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and it does. I like that push-pull nudge idea, because there's not really a singular approach to get a result, whether it's situational or whether it's person to person. It's almost like you have to start to decode what each person responds to positively, so that you're approaching this person with this kind of method and you're going to get something positive. Because the worst thing that can happen, like you're talking about green versus blue, is, they go off the beaten path. They go into their own creative kind of idea that might be different than the original one. And then you kind of come at it as a program coordinator in a way where you're actually like kind of demotivating or de-inspiring them, right? Versus, getting a better result, or getting a result that's somewhere in the middle between what they arrived at and what your original idea was. And I always think it's really interesting, especially, in those kind of conception stages, that time between writing down the idea and then the idea actually becoming. It's so hypothetical that there's always interpretation in that time. And if there's going to be an interpretive kind of moment, then you go, well, I had this idea and it kind of arrived here. What do I keep? How do we kind of bridge the gap between, what's in your head, what's in your mind's eye, and then what a person is actually going to create.
Right. Now, because I've been doing creativity and some sort of administrative type thing, for 30, close to 40 years, you change the approach. Sometimes just like, well, no, I want it blue, ready, do that. And it depends, there's 100 reasons. If you're a band director and you have one part-time assistant and, you got your show from a company, there's a lot of reasons to do that stuff. But the big thing for me, and right before this call, I was a band that I work with, a new client. It's really neat. And they, like a lot of groups, are buying gently used shows because of the unknown right now and adapting it. So, but the band director and the percussion guy are really smart, really creative. Gave them some broad notes on some edits and some big picture stuff. They sent it to me because I have some Koterisms or idiosyncrasies. We all have those, or I hate to say non-negotiables, but a few of them, not many. But what I did is just went through it, and over a couple days, that way I wasn't like, listen, write notes, fix this, because you need to. It's not like you're handing in your paper tomorrow. So out of fairness to everybody, you want to step away and come back and step away and come back a little bit. Sometimes you don't have that luxury because in the summer, in the heat of the battle, you could say, we have one rehearsal day this week and we're going to put in, we're going to change the end of part 2.
Right.
You're going to have, if you're not going to change it to something that will end up making it more effective, and pretty much know that right from the bat, that's spinning wheels and wasting the kids' time. So it depends on the timelines. But with what I did, just sitting the score, and I've listened to this piece for a couple days, you just made the notes, and I talk on audio tape. That way they have it. It's easier for me. I don't have to type everything, and they can come back to it, on their leisure too. But it was like, okay, I see how they interpreted what this was and what I said it was initially. Oh, that's an interesting take. Right now I'm starting to get their sense of flair. My goal then is to help bring that their vision to life, not change it to me. Now, truth be told, as a younger, and in some of those years at Cavaliers, even as younger, I did that. You know what I mean? And I definitely micromanage, and by the time I went to Vanguard, and that was such a fresh start with totally new people. My first year, it's like, no, I'm gonna listen and watch and not do things. So, and from 16 to now, obviously, they do look and feel a little different because it's just different people involved and grown together. So, something you said, Dan, is really important. It's, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but the bottom line is, we're not getting to the right answer. It's not math. We're not solving for X. We're, in this case, bringing a short story, a one-act play, whatever. We're bringing that to life, with performers, live performers, which is a different one. So every year is different. If somebody says, okay, tell me a couple things about Cavaliers, I don't know, maybe you and I talked about it. I get asked a lot about the James Bond show in 2004.
Yeah.
2001, 2002, 2003, totally original music, although there might have been some music that informed Richard Saucedo. He's a brilliant composer, whatever. It was a fun project, and we took it from there. But you have to be careful. You want to start with all the pins up and the curtains closed, or a blank canvas, whatever you want to say, whatever analogy, when you start the next year. What happens a lot of time is, wow, this worked for us this year. This was our moment. These were our moments. We're going to make sure they're in this year. And you can do that for a while, but then you start seeing similarities. And unfortunately, Beethoven's symphonies didn't have to be ranked and rated with the interweb, right? It didn't have to be, that doesn't done. So you don't have to do that. But in this case, it's like sequels. We all love. I watch Rocky Balboa on Saturday night, watching a lot of movies like a lot of us. I hadn't seen it, and it was good. It was different. I knew, obviously, grew up with the first ones and all that kind of stuff. But I think there was enough time between the previous Rocky and that one. It was like, okay, you can kind of get back to who he was and some of the shtick, and people can kind of connect those lines. So, moral of the story is, it's okay to have your method of design of which you go things and your flair, but when you try to do the same thing again, too many times, it may become stale. And it could be stale for in the room, and you just switch it up. So, case in point, in 2003 spin cycle, I traveled with the Corps every other week. I loved the show. My favorite, tied for my favorite ever that I've been involved with. Brilliant people and performers. The performers were ridiculous. The show was really hard. But Jim Campbell, who was a mentor of mine, was a program coordinator at Cavaliers. And when he was there, and, as I would talk to him as a young program coordinator at Cavaliers after I took over for him, they said, well, James Bond, because the Winter Guard did the James Bond show in the 80s. And did really. So, I'm thinking like, well, back when there were a lot more stores, my wife would go shopping, and truth be told, I'd get a coffee or Starbucks, or I'd go into Borders or whatever other, usually Borders or something like that. And you could look at CDs back then. And I'm thinking like, okay, James Bond, you have your perception of what those film scores are. But if you know the history of James Bond, there's been different composers along the way. Mm-hmm. Well, I went like, okay, and you could go in and peruse, put your headphones on and do that if you remember. I'm thinking, let me listen to these soundtracks, because I saw the James Bond movies, but didn't really notice things because you have the icons. And I listened, and the Tomorrow Never Dies, there's like 3 of them. I can't remember, but there was like 3 recent ones that David Arnold had just started doing those soundtracks. And I listened to them and I went, man, this is really good stuff, including, I forget which movie that had Welcome to Cuba in it. Mm-hmm. It with Halle Berry, whichever one that was. And that was a great tune. That wasn't one of the ones I went check. So basically, I found all this great music, and then I loved GoldenEye, and that 2004, and there was these little things, and that was a show. Sometimes you could tell that the staff doesn't want to think, and sometimes some people would just say, okay, force us to go in a different direction and whatever, and we really did, and that was the first time, since Richard had been there, and even after that was pretty mostly arranged music with his flair. He's brilliant, but a lot of arrangements of those tunes. With just some ideas, So that's a great example of like, okay, maybe it's a little. And even when I watched Spin Cycle and I saw the groups around us and just great, brilliant other groups that year. Obviously, in 2003, I was going, okay, I didn't force a change, but it just an accident took us a different place. And of course, you play some of that stuff. Everybody went, yep, that was as we used to say, okay, what are we going to play? James Bond. Okay, let's eat and drink, ready. So sometimes like that. And then other times, and it's a little different now, there's more depth, where when unfortunately the season had to be canceled and things were shut down, we still weren't even sure of all the music we were playing this year. And they're just Post-it notes and big things. And we had the moods or the feels of scenes, but not there. And we probably would still be tinkering right now, to be honest with you. It depends on the year and the date. But it's okay at times as long as it doesn't interfere with the kids and their ability to communicate something. So long-winded, but I figured people would be interested in hearing that.
Right. I think that those years that you're reflecting on with the Cavaliers are well worth always reconsidering, because, I mean, you guys were kind of winning a lot. So and not to mention maybe, I don't know if theatrical is a perfect word. We have, different vocab methods, but those are years where you start to see something crystallizing in drum corps. I think that, the late 90s with both the Cavaliers and the Cadets, and thinking about drum corps that started to maybe think about they're fanning out in terms of what you can do to put a concept across, rather than it's just music and it's drill and the phrasing works and we're showcasing technical skills. Now, all of a sudden, what is the color guard doing to reinforce these concepts? And, those early 2000s Cavaliers years, you see an evolution not only within that drum corps, but I think in drum corps in general. And something that I think is resonant is this idea of mood and vibe. And it's so different being a spectator or being even a member of a drum corps versus being someone who's behind the scenes organizing and designing a show, because when you are perceiving a show, drum corps, indoor, what have you, you're like kind of looking at the events and you're kind of looking at the things that are nameable, and you're able to go, wow, the Cavaliers did this, or Vanguard did this, or Crown did this. But what you don't necessarily become fully aware of or even able to name is all the palette underneath it. Like this idea that you're choosing, for example, a movie soundtrack. And I feel like movie soundtracks are specifically very, very good for the marching idiom, because there's always space for the dialogue and there's always space for the action, but it's so consistent as it moves you through the ideas that the music is fundamentally meant to reinforce an action, which I think is really important, because if the music is too busy, it doesn't leave room for a visual idea, for example. So I think movie soundtracks are a really great example, but it's like what you see is not necessarily what is underneath everything that's making you, yes, I'm like focusing over here at a rifle toss that you catch it and it's right on the sound effect and everything clicks right there. It's also like, what was the mood and kind of the trace components that led you into that moment? So you're like, oh, and it gives you that correct like reaction and emotion. And that is like a day one kind of issue where like, all right, what is the type of show? Like not even what the characters are or what the story is or what have you, what the conceptual fodder is, but like what is the mood supposed to be? And
Right.
that's like a really ambiguous starting place.